How and why red-blooded American men disappeared from America's top colleges. Episode 2. That is the topic of today's video. My name is Craig Meister. I'm a college admissions coach. You can learn more about me and how you can work with me one-on-one throughout the entire college admissions process on my website, which is collegemeister.com. And if you're interested in learning about whether or not you are or your student is on track for selective college admission in the United States of America, I encourage you to go over to my free 3-minute online assessment at areyouontracktogetin.com. Again, that's areyouontracktogetin.com. You'll complete a free 3-minute assessment. Your results will be emailed to you right away, and they will help you clarify whether or not you are or your student is on track for selective college admission in the United States of America. So I encourage you to watch my first video in this series, my first episode, where we really dived in head first into this topic. Today, and it's going to be linked below this one so you can watch it as well. But today I want to talk about basically my second big reason why you have a dearth of, or maybe almost a complete absence of these days, red-blooded American men at America's top colleges. And this is part and parcel of a larger story, of course, which is the disappearance of males overall in higher education in the United States. If you look in a community college, if you look in a graduate school, if you look in a medical school, if you look anywhere really, overall, the numbers of men have plummeted in recent years and decades. And basically, we're now in a situation where, depending on the college or university, if we're looking at the undergraduate level in particular, there are a good number of undergraduate institutions now that are 65% women or more. Which leaves very few men relative to women in the environment, and it changes the culture of the environment. And it is a very different type of educational environment than it was maybe 50, 60 years ago, when in many ways the percentages were reversed. I am not making a judgment call in this series about if this is better, if this is worse. This is what I'm doing instead of sort of just analyzing where we are today and why, basically, in particular, not just men, because that's the overall story, but I'm talking specifically about red-blooded American men are so underrepresented at America's top colleges and universities. It's very important to understand because that's really the hyper-focus of this series, which is red-blooded American men. Now, what is the definition of red-blooded American men? Of course, there is not one single definition, but when you think of sort of the middle 60% of men in terms of disposition, interests, preferences, in terms of behaviors, characteristics, dispositions, and then also of course, isolate out for the fact that there are obviously some men in the middle 60% that are not so impressive academically or intellectually. But of course, in terms of their other interests and behaviors, they're sort of in the middle 60%. So we're really hyper-focused on la creme de la creme of that group, you know, the smartest, the ones that you would think should be in a very highly selective college or university in the United States. But they sort of, in other ways, embody sort of the middle 60% of sort of male behaviors, male interest, a traditional American red-blooded male. Now, again, America has a unique culture, and I encourage you to read up on it. America has a different personality traditionally than many countries around the world. There is a term for this called American exceptionalism. And of course, this was really embodied in the men who founded this country and built this country. And of course, over time, that has changed as well. So what it means to be a red-blooded American man today is of course different than what it meant 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 250 years ago. But it is still sort of my yardstick through which we will be measuring male behaviors, manliness, if you will, in this series. But my focus is less on what makes a man, and instead what makes men disappear from America's top colleges. What has made it happen? So today I want to talk about topic number 2 or reason number 2. And this is a relatively recent thing that's happened, but let's put it in the context of last video where we talked about, imagine going to a K through 12 school or going through your K through 12 schooling in a variety of public schools or other schools and really having a miserable time, which many male students now have a very miserable time in their K through 12 schooling, and they want out. They just want out of an educational environment because everything they associate with education is negative. That was reason in episode number 1. We really dug into that story. Today, I'm talking about, okay, let's say a male student has gotten to the beginning of 11th grade and has not completely soured on the concept of education and likes the idea and still sort of has a flicker of a flame interest in pursuing higher education, or maybe he even has more of a flicker of a flame interest. Maybe he's very excited still to pursue higher education, and he gets to 11th grade and he learns that, as a guy, maybe he's done pretty well on tests in the past. He likes preparing for tests. He's competitive with himself and others, and so he gets motivated when it's time to actually take a test to study, whether it be the night before, the week before, whatever. Again, this would describe a lot of guys, but obviously particularly guys who prioritize doing well academically. And so again, these would seem to be sort of perfect fit candidates for maybe attempting to ultimately matriculate into highly selective American colleges, also known as top colleges, air quotes around the top. And so you get to 11th grade and you're now, you've heard through the grapevine that there are these things called standardized tests. There's the ACT and the SAT, and you've maybe heard of it through a cousin or a sibling, older sibling or family member or parent about, this is sort of like a rite of passage. You're going to study for these high stakes tests. And lots of male students would actually get excited about this. I mean, they maybe wouldn't be overly excited, but they would at least sort of get in the zone of, okay, this is something I have to do. This is a challenge that I have to engage in, and it's a victory I have to pursue. But then you learn in 11th grade that actually, guess what? You don't have to take standardized tests. Yeah, that's what you've heard since basically 2020 from colleges, selective and unselective alike. Now, the vast majority of colleges in the United States remain test optional to this day. A relative handful of colleges are test free, meaning that all the state colleges, basically all the UCs, notably as selective colleges in California, test free, which means that even if you wanted to go through the gauntlet of taking standardized tests or thought you could shine on a standardized test, the UCs won't even look at a perfect score on the SAT or ACT anymore. And there are a handful of other schools that are test free too. But the vast majority of four-year colleges and universities, when I am filming this video in 2024, remain test optional. So here you were sort of girding yourself and preparing yourself for this fight to the finish in high school, and you were going to do well on the standardized test if you're a sort of high achieving man's man, red-blooded American man. And then you find out, well, actually, don't worry about it. You don't have to take the test at all. It's a demotivating, demoralizing message that, okay, well, so what makes these colleges top colleges after all if they're not actually isolating for excellent ability to output information on a standardized test and some sort of foundational knowledge base? If that's off the table, a smart young man in the middle 60% of male behaviors otherwise and interests and dispositions otherwise would be asking himself, so what makes this a top college? Why would I be motivated to try to get into a top college if they're not even isolating for objective academic achievement any longer if these tests are now optional? Now, again, of course, the vast majority of colleges will still accept the test scores, and a handful of colleges in 2024 have announced that they're going back to requiring the SAT or ACT or some sort of derivative combination of options in terms of standardized tests to satisfy a standardized testing requirement. And actually, as of, again, this filming, 5 Ivies have either announced for the 2024-25 admission cycle or for the 25-26 admission cycle that by that point, they'll be 5 of the 8 will be back to be standardized testing required by that point. 4 will be by the 24-25 cycle. So again, there has been pushback in the other direction, but the vast majority of highly selective colleges still remain test optional today. So you can imagine a guy who's competitive, who likes to compete with himself and others, who maybe actually was sort of motivated to sort of show his stuff on a standardized test, is now like questioning the veracity of how are these even top colleges? And that's a very good question to have. It's a question I've, of course, raised in multiple videos in the past, which is if grade inflation exists almost everywhere in the United States, which it does, and most college counselors and teacher recommenders who are writing letters of recommendation are effusive in their praise for students who are applying to particular colleges and want to help their students and feel actually that their jobs depend on them helping students get into particular colleges and universities. And these are now the main factors in considering students for admission is grades in particular courses, letters of recommendation, and of course, essay writing skills, which we'll get to in another video. You can imagine that a rational guy looking at sort of the pros and cons of this and the objective reality of this process would question whether or not top colleges are worth the effort and how can they actually even be top colleges in the way that maybe the student once thought a top college really was a top college, i.e. a place of higher education, excellence in education, the pursuit of truth and knowledge, if there's no objective measures from which they really judge applicants anymore. So the de-emphasis on standardized testing has disproportionately impacted males, and particularly that middle 60% of males who are very interested in competing, in looking at the rational situation in front of them without emotion and asking themselves, what am I getting myself into? What is the return on investment? What are the pros and cons of this versus pursuing other pathways? It's not adding up as clearly any longer, disproportionately for males, especially because many males, as I mentioned in previous videos, thrived on older iterations of these standardized tests as well. They thrived on them. It was not uncommon when I first started doing this to see students who could completely get straight Bs, like straight Bs throughout high school, sit for the SAT and get a 1400, 1450 on the SAT. And guys who could get straight A minuses could easily walk into the SAT and get a 1450 to 1550 on their first SAT without prep. But they've redesigned the test now multiple times. You may not know, again, I'm not going to focus on the ACT as much today, but that's another standardized test that's equally accepted at all colleges and universities in the United States if the SAT is accepted. But the SAT started out as what was known as the Scholarship Aptitude Test. It was basically formulated like an IQ test and rolled out in 1926. So we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the SAT. Now, the SAT is now just known as the SAT. Those letters mean nothing any longer. They don't stand for a word. It's not an acronym anymore officially because they got rid of the word aptitude long ago, and the word scholarship is not part of it anymore. At one point, it was known as the Standardized Assessment Test, which is repetitive and duplicative. And it actually tracks with the de-emphasis on vocabulary that the SAT means less and less. Literally, the word means less and less, but also the scores mean less and less than they ever did because we are actually living during a time period when the SAT is, and I want to make this very clear, I'm using the official definition of the word, the SAT is a degenerate version of what the SAT used to be. That is the most appropriate word. If you don't like the word, suck it up. It's a degenerate version of its old self. The SAT has gone through various iterations since 1926. But most notably, you can know that it used to penalize for wrong answers. So it was a strategic test. So individuals who were good at strategy and really reading the question carefully thrived on this test because they knew if they put the wrong answer, they would get deduction in points during a certain particular time period. That's now been scrapped. And so they had to strategize. Should I leave it blank? Should I put down an answer that could be wrong? There have been different sections on the SAT that have been scrapped over the years, including the analogy section, the antonyms section in the reading portion. There used to be a optional writing section or writing SAT subject tests. Subject tests have completely been done away with for a time period before the advent of the iPhone and technology coming up to the degree it has since around 2007. There was a real push in the early 2000s to have a writing section integrated into the SAT, and it became that way. The ACT followed suit, and there was a required essay, but once the powers that be saw that writing was no longer necessary for the masses, and more people were doing less and less writing. They cut the SAT writing section. So what they were trying, the sort of the climax of actually the content on the test happened during roughly the 2005 to 2015 timeframe. But all along the way, every time the SAT has been redesigned or recentered, it's gotten easier. It's gotten watered down. It's become more degenerate. It's a degenerate version of the old test. So even in 1994, when they redesigned it, they had to basically just inflate the scores because students have been getting stupider and stupider over roughly 40 to 50 years. So it looked like, American youth were really messed up in terms of what they were learning. They were not doing as well on the content tested on the SAT. So the SAT recentered itself in basically the mid-90s. I don't know if I have the exact year right, but it was roughly the mid-90s. And so basically what was a student getting a 1200 overnight became a student getting over 1300, if not closer to 1400 on the SAT for not knowing anything more. They just watered down the test. They basically just inflated the scores. So there have been different iterations of this. Almost every time they've done a major redesign since the 90s, the test has become easier. The test has become much easier. And it's also become much easier and reformatted in such a way as to also gain market share relative to the ACT. And the ACT traditionally was less of a problem-solving test like the SAT always was, and more of and slash aptitude test in its early iterations. And it was that was the SAT, but the ACT was more of a content mastery test. And what I always found in the 90s and early 2000s is that girls traditionally did better on the ACT, guys did better on the SAT. Well, the SAT redesigned itself to be more like the ACT because they were losing market share to the ACT for a variety of reasons, including the fact that there were just more girls applying for and interested in going to four-year colleges and universities. And so ultimately, both tests became more built around the needs, the wants, the expectations, and the strengths of the female test takers taking standardized tests. Now, I should go back all the way to the 1920s. Women did take the test in the beginning. They always took the test. They were not the majority of test takers by any means, but women were sitting for the SAT even in the 1920s. And obviously more and more women were integrating into the workforce, integrating into higher education throughout the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and so on. And so more and more women took the test. But as it became more of a consumer item education and also a status item, especially the top colleges, more and more women especially became interested in the idea of achieving this shiny object that is a higher education at a particular top college or university. So it goes to figure that in a capitalistic, quasi-capitalistic society that we still have in the United States, at least in this field, sort of, in market of education, arguably, in some ways, obviously in some ways it's highly statist and state controlled, but overall, all the currents, all the forces, all the tides were pushing towards appealing more to females in the testing space than males, who liked rigor, who liked competition, who wanted to pursue excellence intrinsically and extrinsically for different, genetic reasons. Men want to do that. And so as the test has become more degenerate, look it up. It used to be a word that people learned, literally, not just thrown around as an insult, but literally it's a word that means something. As the standardized test, known as the SAT and ACT, have frankly both become, in their own ways, more degenerate over the years, men have looked at this process and are less interested in it than ever before. I'm using the definition of degenerate as lacking some property, order, or distinctiveness of structure previously or usually present. So, of course, that is an absolutely correct definition for what the SAT and ACT are today versus what they were 15, 20 years ago. When there was a time when they both required an essay. They now completely removed the essay as a requirement. One, I don't know if it's even offered any longer. No one takes it with the essay any longer because no college requires the essay. So again, that was the latest punch in the face of the American population in terms of, lowering the bar in terms of what students should have by the time they graduate from high school, i.e. the ability to communicate effectively in writing. That, again, is completely gone now, but it's happened in multiple ways and multiple times. Analogies were cut. Antonyms were cut. The reading sections, the actual reading comprehension sections, are now much shorter than they used to be. Another definition, of course, of degenerate is having lost the physical, mental, or moral qualities considered normal or desirable, showing evidence of decline. That's a more arguable definition of degenerate in this context. Obviously, someone from the 1920s to 1950s would definitely use that definition as well to describe what has happened to the SAT or ACT. But obviously, I can also understand that there are individuals who are alive today in 2024 who would say that's too much of a judgment call and we can't really ascribe moral or mental or physical context to this conversation. I sort of respect that. But ultimately, at the very least, from a technical perspective, the SAT is lacking some property, some properties actually, order or distinctiveness of structure previously or usually present or used to be present with the SAT. And so the degenerate version of the SAT, the degenerate version of the ACT no longer excite a young male applicant as much and no longer, frankly, align with what they were doing best in on these standardized tests for years, i.e. tracking their aptitude, their problem-solving skills. That has been stripped away as much as possible, and they've both turned into more of a content mastery test, which aligns more with, are you a good little girl paying attention in school all day? Are you paying attention? Are you doing your homework? Are you checking your I's? Are you crossing your T's? Are you dotting your I's? That is a skill set that is much more in play now on the current SAT and ACT than the old versions of both of these tests, but particularly the SAT, which always worked for the male mind better than the female mind. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it was a thing. It was certainly a thing. And so now we have a situation that the de-emphasis on testing has really hurt males. Not just has the format of the tests changed to better suit the strengths of female applicants, but then the colleges, the top colleges, the easiest colleges to get into the United States and everyone in between made the decision throughout the 2000s, but definitely in 2020 to basically say, no more, we're not even going to require the standardized testing anymore. So those were two twin blows to male applicants of high achievement who have what I would call sort of the middle 60% disposition of interests or preferences, goals, behaviors of what would be normally associated with a red-blooded American man. That was a huge hit, but no one cared. No one cared, no one spoke about it, because the vast majority of individuals in advocacy within the education space, the K through 12 education space, as well as the higher education space, are and were very focused on empowering girls and empowering women and fighting the patriarchy. And this was actually manna from heaven for such individuals, because whether they were willing to verbalize it or not, they knew exactly what was going on by removing the SAT and ACT from being a requirement to be considered for colleges and universities. You now have a situation where a very healthy minority of applicants are getting accepted, or a percentage of each of these entering classes at these very selective colleges that are test optional or test free, of course, all of them, but definitely test optional, who are getting in for reasons other than their ability to perform well on a standardized test. And this, in my argument, disproportionately helps female applicants, and it disproportionately hurts male applicants. That plus the fact that the SAT and ACT are shadows of their former selves, and they no longer really test for things like they used to that would benefit discovering male potential, intellectual potential, and intellectual aptitude, or just intellectual aptitude generally. It now much more tracks with, were you a good student in school? Were you a yes student? Were you a brown-nosing student? Were you a student who was the teacher's pet? That is much more what the content of the SAT and ACT are today than it was in 1965, 1975, 1955, definitely 1935, which at that point it was like, what do you know? What do you know? And it was an aptitude test, and then it became a problem-solving test, and now they're just mush, both of the tests. So not to say they're easy, but because clearly males are not doing as well on them as they used to, and females still struggle with these tests as well. But what they're testing for is completely different. And of course, the content of the test, learning big words, fancy words like loquacious is a word I think I used in the last video, or noisome, or salubrious. These are old-fashioned words now. They're called old-fashioned because no one teaches them anymore. No one cares. And the SAT, at the urging, by the way, of the UC system, which I've done another video or two recently on the UC system and the direction of the UC system, not just recently, but for decades. But the UC system was basically urging the SAT to redesign itself for years because they said that in the UC system, the argument was that the content of these tests does not track with what students are expected to know today, or how they're expected to perform today, or it wasn't relevant today. And what that basically is code for is that the powers that be in Silicon Valley were really upset that they weren't isolating for good little employees. That's what they want, is good, high-performing employees who are willing to jump when they say jump. And so they wanted the test to turn into more of a test to isolate for NPCs, basically, as opposed for creativity, intellectual acumen, academic excellence, aptitudinal excellence, problem-solving ability. Because frankly, Google, Facebook, these companies don't want people who are going to get out of their lane. They want people who are going to say yes to authority as long as they get their paycheck every 2 weeks and are generally able to put on LinkedIn that they work for Google. So again, that's basically where it was germinating from through the UC system. Now, this, again, was actually predating even the advent of Google and Facebook. I will make that clear. But it was always from the sort of the titans of industry. I want to make that clear. This was, if we're timing it out right, this pressure was coming from the UC system as early as the infancy of Facebook. And of course, Google was very little at that time as well. So I don't want to just officially say it was Google or Facebook, but of course they have put a concerted effort into maintaining the dumbing down of the American population overall over the last 10, 20 years. Those two companies in particular have been at the very forefront of it. But before this was even the case, I can name other industries, but I probably shouldn't, and other companies by name who have for decades been pushing for the American general population to not be as creative, not be as smart, because that doesn't create good employees. So the UC system was basically arguing that position under the cloak of, well, this is hurting a lot of students who otherwise would have a leg up in society if we were, frankly, watered down the test, or if we got rid of the analogies, or if we got rid of the antonyms, or if we got rid of the guessing penalty. And so these were the arguments, is that it disproportionately hurts girls, or disproportionately hurts minorities, or disproportionately, but it was always basically under the thumb of industry that UC was doing this. It was absolutely, obviously there were some true believers at the UC, don't get me wrong. There are, and definitely were still true believers at the UCs who were also doing it because they saw an in and a way to tear down a test or tests that were supporting the advancement or the perpetuation of the advancement of red-blooded American males. And they, of course, are pro anything, any activity that would destroy that. They, that destructive impulse is, of course, innate to that group of individuals who want to tear down what they call the patriarchy, or build up girl power, or have a new elite class of some sort other than the traditional elite class, which were, again, red-blooded American men. I am not making a racial distinction in this conversation today or in other videos in the series, but of course, many of the individuals who've been sort of the Minuteans tearing down Gulliver over the last 100 years have had racial animus at the heart of their motivations. And race has played a very big part, but I want to make very clear, I have worked with black males, white males, and Hispanic males, and of course, other males from other parts of the world or other cultures. And across the board, throughout my years doing this, my note was that males always did better on the old versions of the SAT. Females did better on average on the old version of the ACT. And now males are not doing nearly as well in the SAT as they used to do, regardless of their race. But remember, the target was a particular demographic, male, of course. But my concern in this series is much more along the lines of just every red-blooded American male who is independent, an individual, doesn't like to be associated with any group, wants to be thought of as an individual, wants to strive and achieve as an individual. That's the man that is really missing from Ivy League schools and other selective colleges and universities today. And you can understand after me describing all of this, that male definitely has taken a hit, particularly in the last 5 years when colleges have gone test optional and test free. But it was even predating that when the tests themselves were redesigning themselves over the last several decades in order to gain market share compared to one or the other, like Coke and Pepsi, but then also to appeal to the increasing demands of the largest audience of individuals who were increasingly interested in pursuing a higher education at the most selective, i.e. status-oriented institutions in the United States of America, which are the female student. All right, so all these forces come together and they create a situation where the de-emphasis on standardized testing has definitely played a significant role in the lack of, or the almost entire disappearance of, red-blooded American men from America's quote-unquote top colleges and universities. Today's video was, of course, a little bit shorter. Maybe it was actually a little bit longer, I don't know, than yesterday's video, but I wanted to sort of splay it out for you, but lay it all out. Splay it out. Maybe I should go back to my SAT vocabulary, but I want to at least lay it all out for you. We're going to continue to do this series whenever I feel like it. This was episode 2. I encourage you again to watch episode 1 as well. And we'll get into other reasons why the last of the Mohicans, the red-blooded American men, are an endangered species on many American college campuses, particularly selective American college campuses. And at many of them, there's basically none left, frankly. And we'll get into the statistics more, even though you may look at the statistics and say, Craig's crazy. Look, it's a 50-50 student population in terms of male-female. We're going to dig into those statistics more as we get further along in the series so I can explain to you more why, again, I'm doing this series not about males overall, but about males in particular that embody the characteristics of what you would call sort of the typical archetype of the red-blooded American male. That is the male in particular that has been cleansed from as many top college campuses as very possible. And it was done with intention, and it's been done through happenstance and through a series of unfortunate events, in my opinion. I don't think and I call it unfortunate because I think it is unfortunate to target any demographic for extinction in a particular environment, particularly education, which is so foundational to how a society works. But otherwise, I don't take a stance on there should be this percentage of this or that percentage of that, but I definitely have noted the very concerted effort to empty out highly selective colleges of red-blooded American men, and that's why I'm doing this series. All right, so if you enjoyed today's video, please give it a thumbs up or consider subscribing to my channel. If you would like to work with me one-on-one throughout the entire college admissions process, please go to my website, which is collegemeister.com. Until next time, stay safe, stay well, and most importantly, stay stress-free throughout the entire college application process.